Good morning everyone and welcome to this instructional video from the RIPE NCC. My name is Ewan Mackey and I am an IP Resource Analyst as well as a part-time trainer at the RIPE NCC. And today I'm on this video presentation with you to help you understand more about your responsibilities as a sponsoring local internet registry. There may be some questions that come up during the presentation. Hopefully those will be answered, but of course if you do have questions later, do not hesitate to get in touch with us. And meanwhile, sit back and enjoy this presentation. Now let's talk about a little bit about who is who. Some of you may not be aware of some of the terms that we use, so I'm going to take you through those terms just as a little refresher. The first thing is that we have a hierarchy, and that goes all the way back to IANA, that's basically seen as the mothership. Underneath IANA, you have 5 local internet registries, and our internet registry, the RIPE NCC, covers Europe and Central Asia and parts of the Middle East. Now, being a member of the RIPE NCC means that you are a local internet registry. And from the RIPE NCC, you will have received different services, different resources as well, for whatever reason you need to use them. But then you also will probably have what are called end users. Now, to you, those end users may be customers. They may be accounts, they may be clients, they may be a different term than what we use, but we like to refer to them as end users. And those end users you may have already given internet resources to. Think of IPv4, IPv6 assignments. At the same time, these end users may have a need for their own independent resources and their own independent services. So therefore, they require a sponsoring local internet registry. And that can be you, or it is already perhaps you. And like a local internet registry, an end user can be anyone. It can be a company, it can be a charity, can be a church, can be a school, can be a natural person, can be a sole trader, can be anyone. And you can sponsor those end users, and we will take you through the different things that you can do for your end user and how you can represent your end user to the RIPE NCC. Now, your responsibilities as a sponsoring LIR are several. To request and assign internet resources on behalf of your end user. To ensure that the registry is up to date, as you would your own registry. To handle abuse-related matters. To perform due diligence ahead of any request sent to the RIPE NCC, and to contact the RIPE NCC on behalf of your end user. And we're going to go through into each of those responsibilities a little bit more in detail. Now, one of the first things that you can do as a sponsoring LIR for your end user is request independent resources. Now, you may be wondering what independent resources are. You've probably already given your end user a set of IP addresses, IPv4 or IPv6, and those actually come from your allocation. However, an end user may have the need for independent resources for their own infrastructure. So therefore, they can make a request for IPv6 provider independent space or AS numbers. And it's important to know that independent resources basically go between sponsoring LIRs. The assignee is still the end user, but the end user can basically move between providers. Now, to go a little bit more into this, as you see, autonomous systems and IPv6 PI are the resources that an end user can request. And you can request on behalf of the end user, obviously. So it's important that while you've kept in touch with your end user during the process of requesting the resources, that you also keep in touch with your end user afterwards, because again, you also would be perhaps interested to know what the resources are being used for, because in the end, you are responsible for your sponsoring for your end user. It's also important to be aware of independent resources are for the one who has requested them. So the end user has requested the independent resources through you, the sponsoring LIR, but that does not mean that they come from you. The resources are for the end user. So if anything happens to the end user, say a change in business structure where they don't need the resources, a bankruptcy, or they just don't want them, it's not for you to decide what happens to the resources. Those need to come back to the RIPE NCC. IPv4 is something we haven't mentioned a little bit about. It's about IPv6 PI and AS numbers, but IPv4, as you're probably aware, there's not much left. So therefore, IPv4, when it comes to end users, only comes from your allocations. We cannot assign IPv4 PI. There is the possibility through your access to the LIR portal that you do request on behalf of the end user an IPv4 PI assignment through the IPv4 transfer listing service, which the RIPE NCC hosts. And also most important as well is that the end user has their choice of the sponsoring LIR. So if your end user is not satisfied with the services that you've provided, it is within their right to move to another sponsoring LIR. Updating the registry. This is crucial. So whenever you yourself as a LIR go through changes, you let us know about it. You let us know if there's a change in name. You let us know if you want to do a transfer. You let us know if there is even a change in address. And it's the same thing as well that you need to do for your end users. Now, first of all, as a sponsoring LIR, you have your end users and you represent them, but you as a sponsoring LIR can decide either to represent new end users or to terminate the current sponsorship agreement. So do let us know either one. If it's a termination, we will help you with this and get in touch with the end user so that they know who to contact and that they know that they must find a new sponsoring LIR. If you want to sponsor an end user, we'll look into that further. If there is already a sponsoring LIR, we'll speak to them and we will also help you with this process too. Simple name changes are also small but do need to be reported to us. So if your end user has changed their name, however slight it might be, let us know and we'll help you with that too. Transfer requests, so if your end user has decided that they want to transfer their AS number to another end user or even to an LIR, those come through you. You request on behalf of the end user and the documentation comes from the end user themselves. Changes in business structure, and probably very important to know about, if there's a merger, a split, an acquisition, that needs to be reported as soon as possible. Let us know as soon as possible. It is much easier for us to change and update something that has been took place 5 weeks ago than it did 5 years ago. And it can affect the holdership of the resources too. So make sure that you do tell us in time, and also, again, to remind you, keep in touch with your end users so that you know about these upcoming changes or changes that may have already happened. And please perform appropriate due diligence as well. Appropriate due diligence means that you're looking at the documents before sending them to us, making sure that those documents are valid, legal, and acceptable. And of course, again, keep those changes coming in when they happen. Do it on time. Don't wait. Abuse complaints are also something that you need to be aware of as well, and your responsibility as a sponsoring LIR. Now, of course, the world that we live in is one filled with DDoS attacks on a regular basis, spam, malware, and so on. And those need to be reported, and you are probably aware that as an LIR, you may receive complaints about abuse from your network. And that's also the same for end users. Now, you as a sponsoring LIR, you can offer to handle any abuse complaints on behalf of your end user. You can also ask your end user to handle them themselves. They may feel that they are confident enough to handle abuse-related complaints. However, it's very important to be aware that if your end user is unreachable, then that responsibility falls to you as the sponsoring LIR. So therefore, keep in touch with your end user. Make sure that everything as far as registry, resources and abuse-related matters are all up to date. And perhaps consider termination of the sponsorship agreement if the end user doesn't respond. So if we are having difficulty getting in touch with an end user, and if you certainly are having trouble getting in touch with your end user, then don't make it hard on yourself. Perhaps it's maybe a good idea to terminate the agreement, and then we will try and arrange sponsorship with the end user or to try and find out what's going on. Now, there are several do's and don'ts which I would also like to share with you. Do keep in touch with your end users. Yes, it's something you've heard a lot of in this video. I've said it several times. But again, keep in touch with your end users because you need to know what's going on. if an end user has closed, if they're using their resources in a different way than what has been requested, if there are abuse complaints, anything regarding your end users, please keep in touch. Because once again, if there is an issue, it's easier to deal with an issue which is recent rather than ancient. Don't have your end users contact the RIPE NCC directly. Remember, the relationship is with you and the RIPE NCC. There is no relationship with the RIPE NCC and the end user. So if an end user has queries, have them reach out to you. If they do reach out to the RIPE NCC, there may be a possibility to help, but please be aware we cannot share confidential information. And that's certainly the case even if it's an end user that you're sponsoring. Do keep the RIPE NCC informed of all changes involving your end users. Again, if there is a change in business structure, if there is a transfer that has been agreed behind the scenes, let us know about it. Because if those aren't reported, those can have implications for the resources that have been assigned. Don't use your end users' internet resources as if they were your own. Again, you've requested them on behalf of the end user, but it is still the end user who holds these resources. Any resources that are no longer in use need to come back to the RIPE NCC for redistribution to others. And most importantly, do ask the RIPE NCC if you have questions about supporting your end users, due diligence related questions, registry update related questions, resources and anything related to the end user themselves. We will try and be willing and happy to help. And to summarise, you, the sponsoring LIR, are responsible for your end user in terms of the resources they hold, their data in the registry and the RIPE database, much like you are responsible for your own data in the registry. If there is anything you are unsure of regarding your end user, then let the RIPE NCC know about it because we can help you. Keep up to date with your end user so your registry is up to date. And don't forget, the RIPE NCC can be reached via email, phone and chat to assist you with the questions that you may have. There are some helpful links here, and those refer to the relationship with you and your end user. So such as requesting independent resources, you'll see there's also the end user agreement, which is a very important piece of paperwork in establishing a sponsorship agreement between you and the end user. There's also some information about contractual requirements for provider independent resource holders. So that would be the end users in this case, and also what happens when it comes to changes. We do recommend that you look at these links, and again, if there are questions, do reach out, let us know. I want to say thank you again for your time today. Thank you for listening and watching this presentation. Once again, the RIPE NCC will be happy to help with your questions should you have them. You can contact us via chat on www.ripe.net. You can also send us an email via ncc@ripe.net. And again, thank you for your time, thank you for listening, and have a nice day.